Hello and good day, everyone. Welcome to the Logos Learning Center. I'm Fred Garcia. I am the Executive Director of the Logos Institute for Crisis Management and Executive Leadership. And on behalf of all of us at Logos, welcome to the Logos Learning Center. The mission of the Logos Institute is to equip leaders to inspire and ignite others to create positive change in the world. And we could not be more delighted to take this opportunity to share the insights of Jeff Grimshaw and Lynne Viscio and their team at MGStrategy. I have known Jeff and his team for nearly 20 years. We have worked together in a number of ways, including clients in common. I see several of our common clients are already here in this webinar. So good to see you. Thank you for being here. We have also published in a number of ways over the years. Most recently, the Logos Institute for Crisis Management and Executive Leadership Press, of which I am publisher, had the honor to publish their book, 5 Frequencies, Strategies that Turn Culture into Competitive Advantage. And they are going to take the ideas from that book and apply them to the situation we find ourselves in and describe ways to navigate the next normal. With that, let me hand it off to my friend, Jeff Grimshaw. I'll get out of your way. Just a quick reminder, we are recording this session. Jeff and Lynn, all yours.
Awesome. Thanks, Fred. And thank you to the Logos team. We are so happy to be partnering with you on another great adventure here. And thank you to everybody who is joining this webinar. We're excited to have you here. I just looked in the participant list and saw the names of a few people who I have, or who have known me for a very long time. And I know that they will not be hesitant to be active in the chat, especially if they think I'm saying something that's garbage. I know I can count on them to keep me honest. So I'm going to share my screen and give you a brief orientation before we dig into the topic at hand, which is what are some opportunities that we all have now, wherever we fit in our organizations, to shape culture for competitive advantage, knowing that there is a need and there's opportunity here as we pivot out of a COVID environment and look beyond. So let me start with just telling us a few things that Lynn and I have come to believe about culture. It is, generally speaking, not a controversial thing to say that culture is important. Most people believe that it is. And yet, when you ask people what to do about it, there is a whole range of answers, and most of those answers are fuzzy answers. And so what Lynn and I have been working to do for a long time is to make the complex simple and the ponderous practical when it comes to culture. I think somebody a few years ago said it really well. This is Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, who said that he thinks about culture as the leading indicator of future success. So if you think about all the lagging indicators that Microsoft cares about, like their profits and their sales and their earnings per share, what he's saying here is that their culture is, of all the things that all the leading indicators, he thinks it's the most important one. If culture improves, if culture is strong, business performance will follow. If culture stinks, then business performance will follow. Again, this is something that most people look at and they go, that sounds interesting. Maybe it's not the leading indicator, but I totally agree that culture is at least a leading indicator of future success. But one thing that's funny about culture is that we don't typically treat it the same way we do every other leading indicator in business. So in other words, all your other metrics in business that you think of as your big leading indicators that predict the lagging indicators like sales and profitability and surviving and all those kinds of things, retention of A players, all those kinds of things. We don't treat culture the way that we do many other leading indicators like safety or sales or a whole variety of other metrics. and because what you do with all your other metrics is you do two things with them, right? Any important leading indicator, you do two things. You measure them and you manage them, or you work on moving the needle. Otherwise, what's the point? So what we do, and I'm telling you this because it's going to be the framework for the rest of the conversation, is that we try to get good at helping organizations measure and manage culture as a source of competitive advantage. And so I want to tell you about we have a couple of simple frameworks for doing that, because again, our goal is to make the ponderous practical and the complex simple. So just so that when we get into the post-COVID environment, you've got some orientation for this. Let me give you the 30-second summary on each one of these frameworks. So there's a lot of ways you can think about culture. People define it in different ways. If you talk to many social scientists, they will tell you that culture in an organization shows up in employees' cognition, their affect, and their behavior. But that's pretty academic. You actually don't need all those syllables to say it more simply, which is you can define culture, you can measure culture in terms of what employees know, in terms of what they feel, and in terms of what they do. And so when we're working with organizations to define the culture that creates a source of competitive advantage for them, we'll say, okay, what do you need everybody here to know and to feel and to do? And they'll come up with 150 answers, and we'll help them prioritize it to like top 7 to 15. So when it comes to measuring culture as a leading indicator of future success, this is the model we use. Now, how do you move the needle on culture? That's where 5 frequencies, which was the topic of the book that we've published with Fred and his team with Logos Press, comes into play. And here's what we've seen through tons of research again and again, is that intentionally or not, leaders send signals that shape culture across 5 frequencies. You, as a leader, you're transmitting these signals all the time. And culture in any organization is essentially the 200-day moving average of all the signals that leaders are transmitting across the 5 frequencies. Frequency number 1, your decisions and actions. 2 is what you reward and recognize. 3 is what you tolerate or don't tolerate. This is a big one and a meaty one in a lot of organizations. It's the one where a lot of organizations have a lot of pain. How you show up informally and set the tone in the organization has a big impact on psychological safety. And then 5th is formal communication. So these are the 5 frequencies. This is where culture comes from. You want to have a different culture than you have now. You have to look at how do we send different signals across the 5 frequencies. So I'm going to hand over to Lynn. She's going to tell you about a tool that we use. And again, we're sharing this with you now because in a few minutes we'll move over to talking about specifically the post-COVID environment, the next normal. And so having this framework, I think, will be useful to that conversation. Go ahead, Lynn.
Thanks, Jeff. So as Jeff mentioned, culture often seems pretty fuzzy, soft, shapeless, a little bit squishy, hard to get your arms around. And as he also mentioned, we see it differently. We see it as really definable and measurable and malleable. And we have a process that helps others see it the same way. So oftentimes we find that the best way to create the culture you want or the culture you desire is to first start by acknowledging the culture you have today and examining how you got there. And that's where this first tool, we call it the retrospective or backward looking fishbone. That's where this tool comes into play. So in the retrospective fishbone, we start with the head of the fish. And the first thing we do is we identify a characteristic of our current culture that we want to explore more deeply. It could be something that's desirable in the culture, or it could be something that's undesirable in the culture. More often than not, we're looking at something that's undesirable because we want to understand how we got there before we think about how to make some changes. So in this example, we've got high performers feeling burned out. That's a characteristic of our current culture. We're not happy about it. What do we need to do to change it? So first, let's ask, what's the impact on business performance? Because culture only makes sense in the context of how culture is impacting business performance. So we look at it and we say, well, we're losing our talent, we're losing A players, we're losing all our top people, our talent's flowing out the door, and that is not a sustainable way for us to grow. Okay, so that's the business case. The next question we ask is, and how did we get there? How the heck did we create this culture where we're burning out our high performers? And the best way to answer that question is by looking again across the 5 frequencies and saying, what are the signals we're sending to our people that get us to a point where they're burned out or feeling burned out? Now, when we do this exercise, we're not regimented about it, meaning you don't have to put something in every bucket. You don't have to have something in frequency 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. More often than not, you'll fill at least 2 buckets or have a few key things in 2 buckets, oftentimes more, but it's not a requirement. So let's just walk through really quickly and say what it would feel like if we did a retrospective fishbone like this. So we've got our high performers burned out. Now, this does require leaders and the folks doing these fishbones to be honest and reflective, right? They've got to be able to, acknowledge some shortfalls and deficiencies and weaknesses. So they might say things like this. Well, we get it that we keep rewarding our high performers with more work. We call that the winner of the pie eating contest gets more pie. People do good work, so we're going to give them more work to do because we know we can count on them to get it done. Okay, we know that's one of our issues. What's another issue? Well, we evaluate success based on the outcome, but not based on whether or not we've used a sustainable process, a process that's worth repeating. So again, maybe we beat our people to death with this process that got us through to a really nice outcome, but it's not repeatable or sustainable. Okay, what else? Well, if we go over that, so that's frequency 1, decisions and actions where we have shortfalls. If we go over to frequency 2, what we reward and recognize. Again, we ask ourselves the question, how do we get ourselves in the state that we're in where we're burning people out? Well, here's something we do. We reward firefighting instead of fire prevention. Okay, so we love it. We call it out. We think the personal heroics are wonderful. We think it's super when somebody has to work, 15 hours straight in order to get something done because it's on fire. We reward and recognize that instead of asking the question, why did we have the fire to begin with? Sometimes we even reward the people who put out the fires when they're the people who started the fire, right? So we've got to identify some of the things that we can do differently. There's one. Frequency 3, the things we tolerate or say we will not tolerate. One of them is letting low performers skate by, again, while loading up the high performers. So the winner of the pie eating contest gets more pie. And not only do we feed that person so much pie, right, that they're burned out and ready to leave, but we don't ask anyone else to have some pie. So we let the low performers skate by with empty plates, right? So that's one of the things that happens on frequency 3. Something else, we don't tolerate mistakes. We're terrified. We're afraid of making mistakes because we have a low tolerance for mistakes. We tend to point fingers. We assign blame. We don't learn from those mistakes. It's a painful experience. Frequency 4, how leaders show up informally. Well, here's a situation where our leaders, they don't ask for feedback. They don't like it. They don't want to hear it. They don't ask for it. They don't set the tone for it. They're also not very good at giving feedback because it's kind of painful. Sometimes it's hard to tell people things that are constructive. And we have a sort of an approach where we'd rather be right than effective. And as any parent knows, and any leader knows, there are times where being effective is more important than being right. You might be right, but it's not the best way to get the job done. And then finally, on frequency 5, formal communication, we have a mentality where we're focused on excellence rather than agility, right? So we want things to be perfect. We don't want anything to go wrong. We're not about learning quickly, failing fast, and moving on. We're about excellence and perfection. Well, all those things drive our people to burnout. So in a snapshot, that's the retrospective fishbone. And that's the way we would walk through this and ask some key questions about how we got ourselves there so that we can then ask the next question, what do we do going forward about that situation? So the next tool is the forward-looking fishbone. Again, we start at the head of the fish. We ask the question, what is something we would like to see embedded in our culture that'll lead to success? Okay, and here the example is we want our teams to fail fast, learn from mistakes, don't rationalize them, learn from mistakes and move on. And how would that impact our business? Well, it would make us more agile, more innovative, and that would be competitive advantage in our industry. Okay, so now we're going to go through the 5 frequencies again, but this time we're going to ask the question, what can we do? What should we do to boost our signals, to send the right signals so we get to the point where we can fail fast and learn from our mistakes? Okay, so now we're brainstorming. We say things like, well, for starters, our leaders need to role model owning mistakes. We need to delegate decisions closer to the point of activity. And we need to spend a heck of a lot more time coaching, supporting, right? Creating people who are capable and competent so that they can carry the work out and make their own decisions. If we go to frequency 2, what are some of the things we can do differently on frequency 2? Well, for starters, let's reward learning. We might even reward failure if it's smart failure, meaning we did something that we took a great risk, it didn't work, but instead of calling it a failure, well, that's the next step to our success. So we reward that. Frequency 3, we can stop tolerating the sunk cost fallacy. Sunk cost fallacy, we just spent 8 months and $10,000 on this project. We can't cancel it now. It's failing, we're struggling, but we've invested so much in it, right? So we have to stop tolerating the sunk cost fallacy, and we have to stop tolerating people who prefer to be right all the time, even at the expense of effective. On frequency 4, we might put things in the bucket like, well, our leaders need to be more visible. They need to be more supportive. They need to be role modeling the right things. They need to be taking the right tone, talking about mistakes, talking about their own mistakes, owning up to them and sharing the learnings from those mistakes, right? And they need to what we call nudge the narrative, meaning we can tell stories about failures leading to our success and owning those failures, owning the learnings from those failures rather than chalking them up to bad luck and sort of ignoring those or putting them in the dark. Frequency 5, we can do things like make folk heroes out of the teams who fail fast, translate their mistakes, create useful insights. So really quickly, those are 2 fishbones, backward looking and our forward looking fishbone, which again helps us get to the point where we can now start to wrestle with our topic of the day, which is how we create culture that is a competitive advantage in this new normal. So we'll be using these fishbone tools as we move forward.
All right, thanks, Lynn. So everything we just showed you, we feel really is, evergreen. Like, most of these analyses are from real organizations, and they were done either before or during COVID. Now we're going to turn our and I think that all those principles still apply moving forward. But now we're going to focus in on a few things that we're seeing organizations as they're really trying to think about how do we not take anything for granted? How do we very deliberately shape our culture as a source of competitive advantage, knowing the uncertainties and complexities that are likely ahead. So here's a compilation of some greatest hits. So of the smartest leaders we're working with, here's what those folks, those leaders are building into their desired state culture metrics. So Lynn and I, we're going to walk you through them and explain the case for each one of them. And then we are going to pick one of them, and we will walk you through a fishbone around that one. And then you as a group get to pick the second one that we do a fishbone on. And so you can tell us, you can be thinking about which one is most potentially relevant to you. So some of the smartest organizations right now are making a big deal about making sure that people know the new norms for how we work. This might sound really mundane, but it's actually a huge topic. And here's why. I'm going to show you this model. Daniel Kahneman won the Nobel Prize in 2002 in economics for his insights into how humans actually make decisions. Here's his theory in a nutshell. Our brains have a system 1 and a system 2. System 1 is our fast brain. System 1 is not always perfect. In fact, it makes a lot of mistakes, but it's fast. It's fast and it's energy efficient. And a lot of times it makes decisions without us even having to think about them. System 2 is slower. System 2 is really cognitive. System 2 is for chewing on big, important topics. And system 2 is biologically constrained, like crazy. And so, you really can't put more than about 5% of your decision making on system 2 in a day. You can't handle it. So what happened with COVID and what's continuing to happen is that one big contributor to burnout is that people all of a sudden have these decisions that used to run on system 1 that all of a sudden got blown up. Now they have to think about things on system 2 that they never had to think about before. The beauty of system one is you don't have to think about it, and it actually gives you reliable decisions. So back to this item, why is it important to be really obnoxious about having people know the new norms for how we work? It's so that you can save their system two capacity, so they can go back to not thinking about a whole bunch of things. So you save their system two capacity for the business issues and challenges that require it most. We'll talk about later about some of the things that other organizations are doing that I think are pretty cool to help make that happen.
The second one is my authority to solve problems, make decisions, and take risks. So this is always important, but it's never so important as it is during times of uncertainty and volatility. Okay, if we're in a stable situation, it might be possible for a leader or a small group of leaders to make all the decisions and just hand those decisions down, and that might work in that environment, in a stable environment. But in an uncertain environment, that does not work so well. When a leader or a small group of leaders tries to make all the decisions when there's so much uncertainty, you might survive that situation, but that is not a recipe for thriving. At the end of the day, most people and most leaders agree that in a situation like this, the many are smarter than the few, right? So there's wisdom in the crowd being the employee population, the folks closer to the action, closer to the front lines. They have a lot of insight. They have a lot of wisdom. We need to tap the wisdom of the crowd, right? Make sure that they have authority and they know what their authority is if we are going to not just survive, but thrive in times of uncertainty.
All right, I'll take the next one. What do we need people to feel? This one's always true, and it is only become more true, is the importance of people feeling like they're part of a team that cares about one another. A story I like to tell is a few years ago, so obviously it's pretty cool, but we were working with a nuclear power plant, leaders of a nuclear power plant, where the regulators said the culture stinks, said to the senior team, safety, you've got safety problems, you've got compliance problems, you've got performance problems, you're embarrassing the industry, you got to do something about your culture, fix your culture. And so we sat down with them and we said, okay, so in the culture that makes you successful, what does everybody here know and feel and do? And somebody on the leadership team spoke up and said, come on, man, we're a nuclear power plant. We don't give a damn. He didn't say damn, but then I'm going to give you the PG version instead of the real NC-17 version. We don't give a damn what people feel. Can we just focus on what people know and on what they do? And I said, with all due respect, that may be part of the problem here. And so they indulged us. Being part of a team that cares about one another made it into their culture metric. And when we did statistical modeling, when we finally got our hands on data, we said, among your employees, especially your union employees, this is actually the strongest predictor of actual performance, actual behavior. And when they went about changing the culture and created a place where people did feel part of a team that cared about one another, their safety incidents went down, their performance went up. And we've seen this be a strong predictor of actual performance in many other organizations. The reason it's here is because it actually obviously becomes harder to do in a hybrid environment or a remote environment, and just in a confusing, complex environment where things are changing. But it is evergreen in terms of what a huge impact this has on culture, on impact on business performance. I'll take the next one. The second one that some of the smartest leaders are putting in their culture metrics. My leader communicates candidly, helps us navigate what's unknown or uncertain. Why is this important? It's important because there's a lot of research that shows that humans prefer pain to uncertainty. That's how much we dislike uncertainty. And so and there's a heck of a lot of uncertainty right now. So helping people navigate it is a big deal. And one of the things we've seen, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but one of the things we've seen is that even when leaders can say definitively that something is uncertain or unknown at this point, it actually makes employees feel better, because a lot of times they feel like these things are known and no one is telling them. So this is another one where the sense of cohesiveness of a team and culture is influenced so much by whether leaders see themselves as playing a role in helping their people navigate uncertainty.
All right, I'll take the next one. My leader is visible, accessible, and in touch with what's happening. I mean, honestly, like, when is that not important? It's always important. And it's often, almost always, for leaders a challenge, because leaders just run out of time at the end of, within busy days, at the end of a busy day. It's hard to make enough time for this, although every leader knows it's important. And that's true when we're not in a pandemic. When we're in a pandemic, it's that much more important. And leaders got that. The leaders that we worked with over the past 14 months, they realized that there was a huge risk for people feeling isolated, disconnected, anxious about their work. And so they knew they had to crack the code on how they were going to remain or even up their game in terms of being visible, accessible, and in touch with what was happening with their folks. Some leaders, legitimately, they actually came up with best practices that they have committed to retain even after the pandemic, even when we get back to normal or go to our next normal. And they thought at the time they were over toggling. They said, you know what? We need to be super available to our folks. They thought they were over toggling and doing things like, well, I'm going to have like a daily stand-up, morning meeting. We're going to have huddles. I'm going to touch base with folks, because they were concerned. They realized the risk of isolation and disconnection. And so they thought, let's over toggle it first. But what they realized is it wasn't over toggling, that it actually worked. And worked not just because it was a pandemic, but worked because it built relationships in some instances they didn't even have before the pandemic. Relationships, including some challenging ones like represented folks and represented leaders. So some of the things leaders have learned in this bucket, they have committed to maintain, but they have realized the importance of doing this and doing it well, all the time, especially in times of uncertainty. One of the things they did not crack the code on, which was interesting, is how to manage this for new hires in the onboarding process. So I think that's something that's sort of hanging out there as a challenge for most leaders going forward. The next one is feeling confident about our agility and our ability to adapt to volatility. And this one was really interesting. The organizations we worked with, their leaders got really high grades for their response to the pandemic. Not from us, we don't give those grades. Their people gave them those grades. Their people said, you know what? You did a great job. You took care of us. You were responsive. You got us out of the workforce, out of the workplace quickly when that was appropriate. You equipped us to work from home. We got new technologies in place that worked for us. And the people who couldn't work from home, who had to be out and about with customers and clients, they felt good about the tools, the technology, the PPE that they got, the processes that were in place to keep them safe. So they got really high grades. But leaders at every level, we've heard business unit presidents say this and frontline supervisors say this. We're terrified we're just going to snap back to our old ways. We're terrified that that was something that worked for us to get through the pandemic, but we didn't adapt it as a way of thinking and a way of working and a way of being going forward. So that is something I think that's really worth assessing sort of on an ongoing basis, as leaders have it as sort of a point of concern. In our next column, we have a couple of do items, so things we want our employees to do. One is, again, working collaboratively. And this is interesting. Again, who doesn't want to work collaboratively all the time? It's on the radar for most leaders in pretty much every organization we work with. But interestingly, during the pandemic, people found it increasingly important to focus here because it was harder to do. And so they made a very intentional effort to collaborate. So it meant I might have to pick up the phone when I wouldn't typically pick up the phone and call you, but I did. I picked up the phone to call you because I know that our work is interdependent. And so they realized that when they were more deliberate about this, it actually worked better, right? And so even though we didn't bump into each other at the water cooler, in the break room, I couldn't poke my head in your office, the fact that we were both being more deliberate about it was kind of, people have called it somewhat of a pandemic silver lining. So something that's important all the time, but increasingly important during times of uncertainty, that people kind of crack the code and figure out how to continue to do this regardless of circumstances. And then the last one I'll talk about before I hand it back to Jeff is to speak up, innovate, and take initiative to solve problems. And again, this is something that's always important, right? This is about psychological safety, people feeling safe, right? That they can take some interpersonal risks, that they can put something out there and it's not going to have a negative consequence. There's not going to be harm or damage to their self-image, their status, their career. If they put themselves out there with an idea, even if it's an unpopular idea. It's largely built around a lot of the work you'll see Amy Amundsen from Harvard University and others putting out around the topic of psychological safety. But this is about assessing psychological safety. It's not about whether or not people have good ideas. It's about them feeling safe to speak up and share those good ideas. Again, particularly important when we're in uncertain times and we all need to figure out what to do next.
All right, thanks, Lynn. So just to zoom out for a second, again, what we're saying, we don't believe in one-size-fits-all culture metrics. And we don't offer off-the-shelf model to our clients. And in fact, we are pretty obnoxious about saying leaders own culture, and you should not outsource that decision-making about your desired state culture to consultants, any consultants. But we are saying here that as we look into the next normal, that this is what smart leaders are doing, and that would put a wager that in general, the organizations that really develop cultures where people know, feel, and do these things are going to have a competitive advantage. And the last one I didn't talk about is one that might seem a little counterintuitive, but actually I think this one is huge. In fact, I think this one is going to be a superpower for the organizations that really cultivate cultures where people very deliberately, thoughtfully spend time every week on activities that are important but not urgent. And the reason for that is you've got a lot of burnout. You got a lot of people who spend, I don't know, somewhere between 2 weeks and 2 months and 8 months on a response to COVID that was largely fueled by adrenaline, and they are tapped out. And maybe you're one of them, you got nothing left. And so, and at some point you go, I've sort of lost my, what am I even doing here? It leads to existential crises. The only way to break out of that and to feel like you're actually doing something purposeful is to have the discipline around being in a culture, even if it's the culture that you create for yourself because it's not part of the culture that you operate in, to say, I'm going to make sure that I am not just in kill myself today for the right to earn the right to show up and do the same damn thing tomorrow mode. I am going to be in a mode where I actually work on things that are important. And again, the organizations that have done that, the organizations that are doing that, it doesn't eliminate burnout, but we're seeing it go a long way. So this is one that you can adopt even if for yourself, if for nobody else. Okay, so we picked, Lynn and I drew one of these out of a hat for which one we were going to focus on, and for our fishbone to walk you through some of the signal boost around the 5 frequencies that leaders can use to create this kind of a culture that will give you a competitive advantage in the next normal. And we're going to focus on the confidence about our ability and our agility and ability to adapt to volatility. It has all that rhyming in it, so that's another bonus there. And so let's zero in on that one. As soon as we're done with this fishbone, or actually when we're wrapping up this fishbone, we're going to give you an opportunity in a poll to tell us which one you want us to do next. We're taking requests is what we're doing here. So okay, confident about our ability, our agility and ability to adapt to volatility. Why is it important? We're going to see that organizations, a lot of employees know that their organization is capable of agility because they demonstrated it, or they're dead, right? But most people, if they were in an organization through COVID, they know that the company is capable of agility. What they are wondering about, as Lynn said earlier, is whether they are capable of continuing that, and if they are capable of continuing it in a way that isn't just in fire drill mode, that isn't fueled purely on adrenaline. That's going to have a big impact, and we're already seeing it on retention of A players, on how much effort people put into speaking up and innovating, because nobody feels motivated to speak up and innovate if they don't think anything is ever going to happen, if agility isn't possible. And obviously then that has an impact. The confidence in agility is a self-fulfilling prophecy. It actually then creates more agility, and which in turn leads to better outcomes, more resilience, and competitive effect or competitive advantage. So what are some ways that you can do that? Let's start with frequency one. How can you inspire confidence in the agility of your organization? How can you actually create agility with the signals you send through your decisions and actions? A book that I've been recommending to a ton of people is by Thinking in Bets by Annie Duke, the poker pro. And she says that, our outcomes in life are basically a function of two things, our decision quality and luck. And we can't do anything about luck, but we can do things about decision quality. She says, lots of people compare business to chess, but that's actually wrong, because in chess, you can see all the pieces on the board. And in fact, business today is more like Texas Hold'em, where you actually have to start making decisions before all the cards are on the table. So the idea of thinking in bets is saying, how do we mobilize to make decisions or bets, smart bets? Bets are decisions about an uncertain future. How do we make smart bets based on the best information available now? And then how do we rapidly recalibrate when needed? It's a different mindset, because most of us operate in a world where we spend a lot of time talking about who was right or who gets to be right. And this is and thinking in bets is a different mindset that says we're not going to win every hand, but if we're smart and or make decisions and then recalibrate based on new information, we can ultimately come out ahead. MVP, used to stand for most valuable player, but I think now it's become very trendy, but it is important, and that's a minimally viable product. Instead of how do we, minimally viable product often gets misunderstood. Like, let's create something that's sloppy and call it good enough. No, that's not it. It's about saying, let's create something, let's not put extra bells and whistles on things. Let's do something that is good enough that we can put it out there and learn from it. Because it's better for something to exist in a flawed physical state than a perfect theoretical state. Things in perfect theoretical states, we're not actually learning anything from them, because our theories are oftentimes, we don't actually know what we're talking about. We learn from interacting with empirical reality. So MVP, minimally viable product, is about getting us in a spot where we can actually get something out to our customers, get something in front of our stakeholders, so we can actually learn from it without over-processing. Let me hit just a couple here, and then I'll stop yapping, and Lynn, I'll hand it to you. Heuristic hackathon. Okay, so what's a heuristic? Heuristics are rules of thumb, right? So we talked about system 1 and system 2 earlier. Whether we're conscious of it or not, our system 1 brains, the ones that are fast and often error prone, but account for 95% of our decisions every day, they operate off of heuristics, rules of thumb that we don't even have to think about. And the problem in the world today, one of our problems is we've got too many things to think about. We actually need some reliable rules of thumb so we can stop thinking about things. An example, in one of our, in one client organization, we did something called a heuristic hackathon. A hackathon is typically when a bunch of people come together to collaborate on computer programming. And we called this a heuristic hackathon because this was about people coming together and saying, what are the algorithms that are not going to run computers, but they're going to run our system 1 brains? And they were so grateful for it. And one of the things, just like the mundane level of things like, okay, well, now we're going to be on a hybrid work environment, but I know how this is going to work out. I think I'm going to be working from home. Then I'm going to find out that my boss is going to be in the office. I'm going to go, oh, okay, well, I guess there's a loyalty test now that I have to be in the office. So it actually is going to be less productive. I had made plans to work from home and do all these other things, but now I'm going to go to the office because I have to, because my boss is there. I'm going to waste 2 hours on the commute. So that's things that people shouldn't have to think about. So if you can have clarity in your heuristic making to say, hey, you know what? No, here's the deal. If this really is the deal, your boss being in the office is never reason alone for you to have to read her or his mind. Then you actually free up brain capacity for things that are better uses of it. I'll talk about red chair and then I'll stop talking. The red chair could be a blue chair. Color doesn't matter, but in one of our organization we work with, they set up the red chair. The red chair, whether you're in a virtual meeting or whether you're in a live meeting, the idea of a red chair is to appoint someone to be the voice of your customer and to take 5 minutes at the end of the meeting or even 3 minutes at the end of the meeting and ask the red chair participant, looking at this meeting that we just had, again, whether it was on Zoom or whether it was in person or hybrid or both, from a customer's perspective, how did we do? What is your critique of this conversation? Was it clear why the heck we were meeting in the first place? Could this have been, were we creating customer value? Did we go off on a lot of tangents that seemed to do nothing? Did we, should we begun this meeting asynchronously in advance of a synchronous meeting? So having the red chair to hold you accountable is working out great for a lot of organizations to keep them honest. Lynn, what have you got?
So the first one that I want to share in frequency 1 is honestly pretty mundane and boring, but I think it's meaningful. And it's to simply ask your team what's getting in their way. If we want people to be agile and we want to be able to like quickly respond and adjust to volatility and uncertainty, and they're not, something's getting in their way. And I would just simply ask the question, what are the obstacles? And they may tell you exactly what the obstacles are, right? Things like, well, you know what, we don't tolerate failure around here. When something goes wrong, we immediately point fingers at people. We never root cause process. We never do anything other than blame the person who had to deliver the news. Well, that'd be something to note. We have a thick decision-making process. There's 7 layers before any decision can be made. It's hard to be agile when there's a 7-level decision-making process. So simply asking the question, finding out what's getting in the way, and then addressing the top 2 or 3 items is simple and straightforward, but useful. The other one that I want to mention here is crafting and communicating a common cause or an aspiration and the rules of the road, meaning how we'll get there, right? So if it's crystal clear to everybody in the organization, this is where we're headed. And the rules of the road, the way we get there include things like continuous learning and improving, seeing the work through our customers' eyes, playing to win as a team, right? If those are our rules of the road, it makes it much easier for people to feel confident that when they make a decision to be agile, to be responsive, to be somewhat risk-taking, that it's actually in sync and in line with what you're expecting, right? And with the future of the organization. So just being crystal clear about putting that out there. Here, here's our goal, here's where we're headed, here's how we'll get there. And when you make decisions in line with this, I got your back. Should we go to frequency 2, Jeff?
Yep. So, so I'll kick this one off. So one way to do that is to create that confidence and agility and actual agility is to be an organization that where you really focus on rewarding and celebrating learn-it-alls versus know-it-alls. This was at the centerpiece. We talked about Satya Nadella and how he made culture a centerpiece of building Microsoft's competitive advantage. And since he set out in earnest to create a culture that really shifted from learn-it-alls, from know-it-alls to learn-it-alls, the stock price has tripled. So I think they're doing something right.
And the other thing I'd mention on frequency 2 is publicly celebrating learnings that came from smart risk-taking, right, that failed. When was the last time you were part of a celebration for something that failed? Where you actually said, wow, that's fabulous. That gets us one step closer to the goal. We learned a ton from that experience, and let's stop and celebrate it. When was the last time any one of us were a part of something like that?
All right, so let's move on to frequency 3. If you want to have high agility in your culture and carry the and reinforce the whatever agility you demonstrated in the pandemic to actually really cultivating that as a more sustainable source of competitive advantage, there's a lot of things that you can't tolerate. One of them is lots of energy going into making really, it's shocking. I mean, it is absolutely shocking and sickening how much extra effort goes into polishing the hell out of PowerPoint decks in so many organizations. It's shameful because that is energy that could be going into actually innovating and solving problems and creating value for customers. If you're going to be agile, you can't tolerate minimization or rationalization of mistakes. It's got to be about, but there should be stigma. There should be stigma from people who make excuses. There should be stigma for people who whip up stories that remove, that make themselves victims of external factors that they couldn't do anything about. When the reality is that there are very few things that fall fully into that category. There is something to learn from almost everything that goes wrong. You're not going to be successful in the future if you have high dependence on personal heroics. It's not going to work. People are already burned out, and if that's what you're counting on, you're going to have a heck of a time. And one of the reasons you get past a culture of dependence on personal heroics is by tackling issues at a root cause level. What else can we not tolerate?
Well, we cannot tolerate people who give answers all the time, leaders who give all the answers to every problem and situation. So as a leader, one of the things you can do is refrain from problem solving, from giving the answers to problems to your folks. When they come to you with a problem, it is sort of instinct for many of us to give the answer. Here's the answer, here's what I would do. But instead, if you want an agile organization, you need problem solvers. So you need to ask questions. You need to ask as many questions as are relevant until the person you're talking to can discover the answer on his or her own. And eventually that list of questions shortens when people get to be better problem solvers. But that's one of the things that's particularly useful. Another is actually, in a somewhat retrospective way, addressing a recent, kind of a sticky, difficult situation that someone had to work their way through, or a group had to work its way through. And once you've discovered a little bit about that situation, you could talk about, what you could have done, what might have been a different way to address it, and what authority they might have had to solve it in the moment or solve it differently. And then be crystal clear about the fact that going forward, if a situation like that comes up again, it doesn't have to be that exact situation, but anything similar, you have the authority to do, X, Y, and Z, and being really explicit about those things.
All right, so moving on to frequency 4, and they're all important, but honestly, frequency 4 is easy to overlook because a lot of times people aren't entirely sure what could fit within frequency 4. It's just like informal communication, but how much gravity could that have? But actually, this is huge. And so one of the things is, if you are a leader who has created success for yourself because of all the things that you have decided in the past, you might find it difficult to actually transition to what you're probably going to need to do more successfully in the future, which is to really see your role as a leader as creating vision for teams, architecting the environments, whether it's hybrid, whether it's remote, whether it's in person, architecting environments where they can get results. So this is not about, catering to the whim of every person or making everybody happy, because that's chasing your tail. But it is about creating an environment where people do feel like their needs are served and where you are architecting the environment where they get results. If you're not getting results, then nothing else ultimately is going to matter. And then it's about coaching, right? So so many leaders that we work with love making decisions. They love their decision rights, and for them to achieve the outcomes that they really want to achieve, they actually have to see themselves showing up as a coach rather than the decision-making authority. Dawa, so many things are about, there's a saying that everything that happens in an organization happens in or because of a conversation. You want to change the culture, you got to change the conversation. So here's a few ways that you can change the conversation and make it easier for people to learn from mistakes instead of rationalizing them or hiding them. DAWA stands for don't ask who, ask why. And it means that if your instinct when something bad happens to point fingers and say, who did that? You're going to have a heck of a time. People are going to get really capable, really highly skilled at excuse making and finger pointing. If the go-to question is why, if the working assumption is that the problem was in process, not in people, you can actually have a learning organization. Similarly, another great mantra is reserving the right to get smarter. This is the nature of agility. This is the nature of thinking in bets, is to say we have to make a decision based on the best information available in an uncertain future. And when new information reveals itself, we're not going to be idiots clinging on to that because our egos are tied up in that decision. We're going to reserve the right to get smarter. And so many things only become possible when leaders and cultures really elevate reserving the right to get smarter as an art form. Similarly, mistakes are expected, inspected, and corrected. This is another great one that really says just in a few words what the magic formula is for being an agile learning organization. And then of course, as a leader, you set the tone. So role modeling, treating feedback as a gift. And you're going to have a heck of a time if you as a leader get defensive every time you hear negative information. Lynn?
Yeah, I would also add, I think humility is an underrated leadership characteristic, right? I mean, it's one thing as a leader to say, I'm the leader, and let me help this team assess where some mistakes were made and how we can learn from those. It's another thing entirely for me as a leader to say, let me tell you about a mistake I made and what I learned from it. And so I think role modeling is probably one of the most significant things a leader can do, right? To actually show that we are willing to be agile, to make mistakes, to fail, fail fast, to move forward and learn from those mistakes.
Okay, and then in formal communication, some of one of the things that we've seen is in a lot of tech firms that young people have really changed what it means to fail, and I think it's useful. There's this thing, I'll stick to the PG version, but there are these popular events, you might have heard of them, you might have participated in them, but they're called F-up nights. And the idea is we can't be agile if we don't learn from mistakes. So therefore, let's make failures we have learned from a badge of honor. And so we have clients in Latin America who, it's a different culture and they are really comfortable with saying that they have F-up nights or F-up events, but it really is something they've adopted internally to separate the ego, or actually to have learning be something that is driven by your ego, where our defensive orientation typically is to hide those things. So it's all about how do you engineer an environment where people actually will learn from mistakes instead of hiding them. Folklore by design is finding stories and being really deliberate about sharing them, because we all have information overload, and information presented in story form is more likely to be remembered and acted on. So, telling good stories, especially with a disconnected workforce, is going to be huge. I mean, really developing your storytelling as a skill is going to be a big deal in the next normal, even more so than it is now.
Right. And one other one to mention just on frequency 5 is doing regular after action reviews or lessons learned debriefs. And the reason to make these regular is people are much more open to having conversations about the things that went wrong if we also regularly talk about the things that went well in after action reviews. An after action review shouldn't just be anytime a project got screwed up, let's root cause why. This should be the standard way we assess the things we've done, and we capture our learnings, both good and bad, going forward. The other thing is, I know a lot of groups who do after action reviews, but sometimes you say, did you do an after action review? Yes. What happened with the results of that after action review? And it's, it's buried somewhere in somebody's drawer, or it's on a document in a laptop. the results aren't communicated, they aren't archived for future presentation or future projects. So it really is about doing these regularly with both the positive, the positive and the negative, and making sure that the results of these actually get fed back into the system, because that's the only benefit of doing it. One of the things that I want to mention as we sort of wrap up this fishbone is you may be looking at some of the sticky notes that we put out there and thinking, well, that thing wouldn't work for my organization, or I like that one, but I don't like this one so much. Keep in mind, this is sort of an example of, if it's time to build your own fishbone, you're going to put the things on here that work for you, that would work for you. So these are just sort of examples and samples, not to be, hung up on would all of them work, or are they perfect for you?
Yeah, thanks for saying that, Lynn. So now our friends at Logos are going to launch a poll, so you can tell us which one you want us to fishbone next. And gosh, Lynn, I'm nervous. I hope we have something to say about whatever they pick.
Me too. I'm on the edge of my seat.
All right, Katie, I can't tell how many people have voted. People are still voting, but whenever you think we've provided sufficient time, I'm eager to see what the results are.
Too bad we can't vote, Jeff, or we could sway the result.
I know, that would be useful.
So I can share what our results are as of now. We left the poll up for about a minute. If you haven't voted yet, please go ahead and vote now. There's a couple who haven't, but it is actually pretty close. So the number one culture metric that people selected, 29% selected, were know the new norms for how we work. I say It was close because there was a tie for second place at 21% each. So there's a lot of different ideas around this.
Okay, I'm sorry, can you say again, what was the second one?
So know the new norms for how we work was number one, and the tie for number two was, hold on. Okay, fully now over. More people voted, know the new norms for how we work. But the second place at 20% apiece was, one, feel confident about our agility and our ability to adapt to a volatile work environment and work collaboratively to solve problems. That was tied for second place. So interesting mix of results.
Okay, great. Okay, love it. Okay, so knowing the new norms for how we work, you all have your own ideas. For the 29% of you who picked that one, you're going to have your own ideas for why you picked that one, why it's important to your team. And so but I will tell you from my perspective, the places that we're working, again, it has to do a lot with a few things. And Lynn, we can create this list together, but one of them is, like I said, we actually need people to not have to think about this stuff. They need to not think about it because we actually need their brains for other stuff. So I'm going to say it's about mental capacity and actually having more access to the system, to cognitive capabilities that you thought you were paying for when you hired these people. This is also going to have a big impact on retention of A players. And that ultimately is, has its own set of lagging indicators in terms of business performance. Lynn, anything else I need to hide there, or should we just jump into the
No, I think we should jump into the fishbone.
Okay. So go ahead. Yeah.
No, I have a few ideas we can add to our list. So for frequency one, I think one of the things leaders can do is to set some expectations and then immediately begin role modeling the behaviors that you want to see. And I know, for example, virtual meetings is one of those places where leaders have expressed both some, some pride in the decisions their people made, but also some disappointment and some frustration. So, for example, people being on Zoom meetings who have gone dark, cameras off, mics off, they don't engage in the conversation. You're not even sure they're still, engaged in part of the meeting. So, as a leader, set the expectations and immediately begin to role model it. And then working off of that, I would say frequency 2 is reward and recognize the things that you see. So whether it's a virtual meeting behavior or expectation, or it is something else, reward it, call it out, and make it public. If you like the way people are behaving on a Zoom call or a Teams call, mention it, call it out, and acknowledge the person who engaged above and beyond or offered to facilitate the meeting for the day.
Lynn, I thought I could listen to you and type, but I'm not very good at that.
I'm not either.
Yeah. Okay. All right. There's one back here I want to talk about for leader decisions and actions. So I talked about heuristics. Again, the faster we can equip people with new heuristics, so there's a whole bunch of things they can stop thinking about, the better. And I know that a lot of times people are going to, we're working with a lot of organizations right now where you've got people going back to work, and some people are thrilled that they're going to be going back in the workplace, and some people are really unhappy and saying, well, why are we even ever going back at all? Because we proved that we could get it done. And so you can't make everybody happy. You cannot make everybody happy. You can be not a jerk about it, but you can't make everybody happy, right? One thing we know is that human beings have enormous capability to adapt to change when they know they have to. So I think the important thing here is to put people in a mode where they don't have to mind read, where they don't have to guess. This sounds really mundane. It sounds like, I thought you were going to tell me something way more interesting than this, but I'm telling you, perhaps the number one thing you can do is really just take the guesswork out of a lot of things. Now, going back to the idea of thinking in bets, you also have to say, hey, we're going to learn. And so we may recalibrate. But for now, here's what we're going to try. We're going to measure success based on our outcomes. And that includes things like collaboration and innovation, which and our ability to onboard new talent, which, the physical environment it still has some advantages. But, we're going to judge. Here's how we're going to judge this, and here's what we're trying now. And if you try to make everybody happy, you probably can't, and you'll go nuts. So it's all about taking the guesswork out of it. Checklist for caring connections. What I mean by this is, of course, we now don't see people the way that we did, and for a lot of environments, that's going to hybrid environments, that's going to continue to be that case. Why do we use checklists? Tal Gawande wrote that amazing book, Checklist Manifesto, that says surgeons and pilots have checklists, not because they're dumb, but because they're really smart, and they need to there's a whole bunch of things they need to not be focused on and think about. So think about what your checklists are. One of your jobs as a leader is to have caring connections, to actually have relationships with people before you need those relationships. So the question is, what's your checklist? What's your checklist that says, for example, in addition to all the other urgencies, in addition to all the other fire drills, am I going to do some of those things that are important, but not urgent, and make sure that I have some kind of caring, actual, honest to goodness, heartfelt connection with the people on my team or with peers. And again, you got to build those relationships before you need them. All right. Lynn, what else we got?
I would add one to F5. So I think in talking to folks who are parts of organizations that are either headed back or headed back shortly into the workplace, there's a lot of anxiety and a lot of concern. And I think one of the things leaders can do is to continuously communicate what they know when they know it, even when they don't have all the answers. So we call that, communicating in probabilities, right? So it might sound something like this. Here are the decisions our leadership team has made today, or here are the things we know. We will be returning to work on July 25th in a hybrid model. The hybrid model means 3 days in the office, 2 days out of the office. Here's what we're not sure about yet. We don't know if everybody has to be in on the same 3 days, right? Or if they can make some choices. So you're communicating in buckets that basically say, here's what we know. Here are the things we're not sure about yet. And I can also tell you, here are some things that won't happen. We won't force people back into the workplace if they're at high risk and are more comfortable being at home, right? And so communicating those probabilities just sort of takes everybody's anxiety down. And it also earns some trust for leaders, because people realize that they are doing their best to communicate, and they're communicating everything they know, even when they don't have all the answers.
Yeah, so I'm going to hit a couple of things for what you don't tolerate and what you should be really clear about, again, in the spirit of taking the guesswork out of it. One of the things that I think will be advantageous to you is if you make it really, if you declare to your team, whatever span of control you got, is that we're not going to operate on an always on mentality, that in fact, part of our job is to sustain the ability of the team to collaborate and produce results later. And that means that if you're always expected to have your phone on and answer stuff at 2 a.m., unless you are literally in the firefighting business, that's not sustainable. And so having discipline around that is really key. And then the other one around secret loyalty tests, people hate secret loyalty tests. And so having open, honest, direct conversations about, for example, things like, are you supposed to be in the office? Are you supposed to guess when I'm going to be in the office, and then be there, and saying that's not what we're going for here, is I think really important. And then when it comes to how leaders show up informally, I think again, this idea about being vulnerable yourself and having some empathizing with people and showing you care on a personal level is really key and sets the tone. Creating an environment where, for example, you you are professional, but you tell them about, if you're working from home, some of the challenges that you're having working from home, so that it continues to make it safe for them to not have a perfectly curated background. Those tone setting behaviors will go a long way to have people feeling like they're comfortable and really truly understanding what the new norms are. Again, it's taking the guesswork out of it. That idea of a heuristic hackathon is lots of organizations are really loving that and enjoying that. And again, it's about saying, what are those rules of thumb that are going to guide how we show up with one another? And so bringing people together to whether you call it heuristic hackathon or not, but making those rules of thumb explicit and collectively owned is a big deal.
I would also add, under frequency one, I heard something really interesting today. And the signal booster, the coaching point might be to examine the data as a leader, as you are making decisions about what the next normal looks like for you and your organization or within your team. And the interesting thing that I heard was one of the organizations we work with, they actually were looking at their service reps, their customer service reps, and realizing that all of their data moved favorably. All their data points were more positive with their customer service reps actually working at home from their kitchen tables than when they had them coming into the office working in their cubicles. Now, I would never, deem to tell an organization that they should leave their customer service reps at home if that's the case, but it is sort of worth looking at the data as you make a decision as opposed to making that sort of snap back to what we know decision. Well, we should all come back into the office. Clearly, that's the right thing to do.
Yeah. Okay, so hopefully there's there's something there of use. By the way, we should, I'm looking at the time and I know it's time for us to open it up for questions. While Katie is doing that, let me offer this. For everybody who signed up, if we've got your email address, we're going to send you your own Miro board. So we're going to make a copy of this, and then we're going to give you some blank 5 frequencies fishbone templates in your version of the board. So you'll have this artifact from this conversation today, but you will have your own unique URL, again, with some blank templates. So if you want to go in and I think Miro will ask you if you want a free account, and you can do that if you want, if you're not on Miro already. Obviously, we're big fans of the visual whiteboard. You can go in and do that, costs you nothing, and you can play with fishbones. And if you want to engage your colleagues in fishbone analysis, you can do that. And again, that'll be part of the follow-up that we provide in the next 24 hours or so. All right, so Katie, did we get any questions?
Sure. So first, let me make sure everyone knows now is our time for the Q&A. For today's session, you'll see a Q&A button on the bottom right side of your Zoom toolbar. Please use that to ask questions of Jeff and Lynn, and I will moderate as many questions as possible in the time that we have left. And we'll be sure to record the questions as well, so we won't necessarily lose those either. I have oh, here we go. There's a question that was put in the chat from, please forgive my pronunciation. Oh, sorry, that's your last name, Marie. Marie asks, what are the biggest culture mistakes that leaders make?
Oh gosh, how much time do we have? Okay, well, Lynn, do you want to go first, or you want me to go first? You're going to have to yank me in a minute just to stop talking, because
Oh God,
there's so many candidates. There's so many candidates. Okay, so here's one. One is that they confuse engagement and engagement scores as the real indicator of their culture. And at some point that might have been true, but engagement surveys have really become divorced from culture in a lot of ways. And if you think I'm being hyperbolic, there are so many organizations where they measure stuff that leaders doesn't really think is important. They go along with it and create action plans to get HR off their back. And employees at this point have learned that if, there's a saying in many organizations, give 5 to stay alive, which means give really good scores on the engagement survey so that we don't get bothered with follow-up action planning. And by the way, we have also been in organizations where when we say to leaders, why are you tolerating bad behavior? They say, I don't want to get bad scores on my engagement survey. If I hold people accountable, engagement scores will go down. This is insane. It's absolutely insane. That's a huge problem that's happening collectively in organizations. More practically, for specific leaders, we are, a lot of us tend to be really short-term focused. The academic term for it is hyperbolic discounting, and it means that we make irrationally short-term decisions. We focus on things that help us in the short run, but just have incredible cost on the long run. And so one of the things that we like to say is to be long-term greedy. And to be long-term greedy, it means that you calculate the return on an investment based on longer than typical time horizons. So a lot of things that stink in cultures are because people do stuff that helps them survive the week or the quarter, and it creates toxic environments for the long run. So it's really thinking about what's the best decision here that actually has a good payoff in the long run. Quick example, like if you fail to confront low performers and just give the work to high performers, that actually helps you. It's a short-term decision. It actually helps you get through the day. It costs you in the long run very dearly though, because eventually that A player is going to stop being motivated and they're going to go somewhere else, or they're going to give you C-level work because that's all that's required apparently. And you haven't done anything about it. And so you're going to pay a price. So it's really just give yourself permission to be greedy, but be long-term greedy in terms of the time horizons for those kinds of decisions.
Yeah. I would add two things to that list, Jeff. I would add these two things. Number one, we see leaders take their foot off the gas all the time. We see leaders who work really hard. They see a low score. It's painful. They don't like it. They put corrective action in place. They pay attention to it. And as soon as the score goes up and gets to a place where they're pretty happy, they take their foot off the gas, as though like they can stop doing that thing now and the score will stay the same. And it never does. And then eventually the score drops back down and they start the cycle all over again. So that's something we've seen repeatedly. That is a mistake around culture. The other is we often see senior leaders who create commitments to action. They take sort of collective action at the senior leadership level, but they fail to engage leaders closer to the front lines. So they think if as a senior leadership team, if we decide to do this, that's good enough, without realizing that every leader in that organization, if it's about being visible and accessible, if it's about being a better communicator, sharing decision-making, empowering, whatever it is, if your frontline supervisors aren't doing the same thing, the impact on the organization is going to be minimal. Those are two things that we see happen repeatedly that we constantly are sort of working, coaching, and sort of equipping leaders to do differently.
A lot of food for thought with that. We've got a couple of more questions that came in while you were answering. The first comes from Darren Mitchell. Can you please expand on the red chair concept? Should this person be an outside person or internal?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, so the idea of the red chair is it's somebody who is attending the meeting anyway, but you are asking them essentially to put on a different hat. So most of the meeting, they're going to participate just like they would if they weren't in the quote unquote red chair. But then whoever's leading the meeting says to them at the end, okay, so what's your take on, Darren, you participated in this from the point of view of our customers or our business partners, whoever is your customers. And so how do we do in terms of focusing on the things that ultimately create more value for the customers? And so that's an opportunity to make it potentially fun and a little bit safe to go, Darren, come up with something. Whereas Darren probably isn't normally going to say at the end, Darren unprompted probably isn't going to, take a stand for 5 minutes at the end of the meeting otherwise and say, hey, folks, we wasted a hell of a lot of time on stuff that is just a lot of posturing, could have been handled elsewhere, could have been handled with different people. So really it's about creating a psychological safety for somebody to speak the truth at the end and saying they're the red chair person that gives them the jurisdiction to do that.
And you can do the same with a red chair and ask someone to be sort of the voice of the patient, the voice of the customer, the voice of our client throughout. So that whoever is sitting in the red chair can also chime in and say, we're talking about X, but honestly, if I'm the customer, I'm not happy with X. I think that falls way short of my expectation.
Thank you for that. Our next question comes from Sandy Fuller. What do you recommend when leaders think the entire company is agile because one unit was successful through the pandemic because of the resources available to that unit, but in reality, the entire company is not as agile?
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of this, the cynical answer is everybody's just going to do exactly what they were doing, but they're going to say they're working in sprints and nothing's going to change, but they're going to pat themselves on the back and say that they're doing agile. But here, so what do you say to them? I think it's, it depends on, your comfort with having a courageously authentic conversation with, whoever you're talking about. But I think one of the things that we're seeing is that while everybody feels good about the agility that they demonstrated during COVID, they also have some awareness about what parts of that were not sustainable. And so, how you frame questions a lot of times has a big impact on how you solve questions or problems. And so I think adding the sustainability piece or even throwing in adrenaline, because I think that resonates with people, where you say, okay, so how do we demonstrate, whatever agility we demonstrated, how do we leverage that post-COVID in a way that is sustainable, in a way that is not adrenaline dependent, and in a way that is reality based in terms of the resources that are actually available to support it. And so the best, so it all depends on your ability to influence and help shape a no BS conversation.
I might ask, leaders in that organization to define what agile looks like to them. So if we're saying, oh, we're all agile now, I'd say, well, let's define it. What's our definition or our description of agile? And let's be really succinct and practical about that definition. And then let's actually match up different business units or different departments or teams. And let's look for those behaviors and see where they really exist. Because that might be kind of a reality check for, is it everywhere or is it in one spot alone? I suspect that'd be a good reality check.
Yeah, that's a good idea, Lynn. I like that.
So I have another question about a different part of the next normal. And it's a question noting that societal expectations around diversity, equity, and inclusion have changed in the past year. Can you offer any tips in creating an inclusive workplace when returning back to in-person work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've been talking about this a lot because, a lot of times what happens is diversity and inclusion gets bolted onto things, and when it does, it feels like an HR initiative to a lot of people, like they're checking the box. And I think we have been asked in many organizations to say, can we instead really focus on creating a culture where we're setting the right signals on 5 frequencies and make sure that those signals are going to create an environment that is welcoming of diversity and creates an enormous amount of inclusion. Frequency 4, how you show up informally, creating that psychological safety where people feel like their ego is not on the line to speak up, where they don't have to guess how safe it is to actually voice their opinion. As human beings, our brains don't know the difference between protecting our bodies from like a saber-toothed tiger or protecting our egos from ego threats. So there's a lot of work to do to create an environment where people feel like they can actually speak up, and it doesn't actually create, obviously they're not, I hope, under physical threat, but it can create a feeling of an existential threat. And if you have that, you're going to have a hell of a time actually getting any innovation or collaboration around problem solving.
So mindful of time, I have one last question. One of the things you've noted today, as well as in your book, is the importance of leaders sending these signals to their employee. The last question is, what role do those who do not hold leadership positions play in actually moving leaders to create a stronger culture that creates competitive advantage?
Yeah. Well, instead of, because a lot of our clients are really in agile environments and are doing a lot of work through fit for purpose teams, instead of saying, we're actually making a different distinction. Instead of, oh, well, you have direct reports, so you're a leader and you're an individual contributor. I think the new world is going to be more about basically everyone is a leader. It doesn't matter what the org chart says. So instead of saying, what do the 5 frequencies mean for me as a non-leader? I'm going to say, you're a different kind of leader. And you're probably going to be participating on teams in different ways. You're going to be collaborating in different ways. When frequency 2 and frequency 3, what you reward and recognize, what you tolerate, you don't have to be a leader to give warm signals to people. And you know, Lynn and I are peers, and neither of us reports to the other, but you know, I think it's important. It matters to me. If I ever did anything good and Lynn said, gave me a warm signal for that, you know, I would be pretty happy about that, and that would contribute positively. So that's a long-winded way of saying I don't think it matters that you don't have direct reports on an org chart. Did I say something good there, Lynn? Do I get a warm signal for that answer?
You get a warm signal for that.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think every person can impact through the 5 frequencies. And we actually do coach a lot around sort of the peer-to-peer relationships that come out through the 5 frequencies, including peer-to-peer reward and recognition, which sounds like, you know, how do peers reward each other, but they do with their words, with their actions, with things they tell others, the stories they tell.
Thank you for that. Those are all the questions we have, although if you all have more questions for Jeff and Lynn, the conversation doesn't have to stop here. Please feel free to reach out with questions either to the Learning Center or to Jeff and Lynn, and I will send it over to Jeff and Lynn to offer their closing remarks before Fred Garcia offers his own.
Thank you. Thank you to the Logos team. Thank you for everybody who joined us. I love the questions. I hope you got something, maybe just even one thing useful from it. You know, if you didn't, then, you know, track us down and extract something valuable from us. You know, keep at us until we give you something you can use. We're going to send you those Miro links. So again, you'll have your own board. You can, in perpetuity, do all the fishbone analysis that you want to do. Lynn, whatever we covered.
No, I just would mirror the same. Thanks to the Logos team. Thanks to everybody for being on today. Thanks for the questions. I think your questions were outstanding questions. Definitely hope to see you inside the Miro boards. And if there's anything else, we're happy to answer other questions outside of this forum.
And thank you, Lynn, and thank you, Jeff, and thank you all for being part of this today. For those who joined late, I'm Fred Garcia. I'm the Executive Director of the Logos Institute for Crisis Management and Executive Leadership. We've been learning from Jeff Grimshaw and Lynne Viscio of MGStrategy. They are among the authors of 5 frequencies, leadership signals that turn culture into competitive advantage. Here's what you can expect next. As Jeff mentioned, you'll get an email from MG Frequencies. You'll have the opportunity to begin to apply this way of thinking to your own organization and its culture. Feel free to reach out to them directly. You can always reach out to us at learning@logosconsulting.net. This is part of the Logos Learning Center. We invite you to check out some of our other offerings later this week. We will be offering 2. We will be offering crisis response and competitive advantage. And we will be also be offering managing meaning in leadership communication. If you feel so inclined, feel free to leave a review on a Google Business. We will drop into, or in the chat right now is instructions on how to do that. I'm delighted to see so many of our clients and friends participating today and asking questions. Thank you all for being part of this. Again, thank you, Jeff and Lynn. Thank you, Logos team. Thank you all. We'll adjourn here. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Fred.
Thanks, everybody.